Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our evening webinar. Thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us here on Zoom. My name is Gregory Stevens. I use they and he pronouns, and I'm the Northern California Director here at California Interfaith Power and Light. Our mission is to inspire and mobilize people of faith and conscience to take bold and just action on climate change. And honestly, there's no better time or more urgent time than now to do just that. But before I introduce our guest speaker, I would like to share a couple of ways you can plug into our work here at CIPL. And you can find all the details on this at interfaithpower.org. And you can also email me directly at gregory@interfaithpower.org. I will also put that in the chat a little bit later. The first program I want to lift up, though, is called Our Sacred Canopy. Through this initiative, we're planting trees across California to help build strong, healthy tree canopies in neighborhoods that have been historically denied the many benefits that trees do provide. Trees are powerful climate solutions. They absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, helping to slow climate change. They regulate the water cycle, prevent erosion, reduce risk of flooding and drought. Trees, they also cool our communities, improve air quality, and provide shelter for countless species, protecting biodiversity and supporting all living creatures. So please reach out and help us by planting our sacred canopy across California. The trees are free and we can plant as many as you want. The second program is specific to congregations in Alameda County and San Joaquin County. In partnership with Ava Community Energy, we are looking for congregations to install electric vehicle charging stations and to build out the electric infrastructure through our very own faith communities. I didn't realize this, but the Bay Area has the sixth worst air quality in the country. So, in response, one of the most powerful ways we can take action is by advancing clean transportation that reduces pollution and safeguards the air that we breathe. So, please reach out if this sparks your interest. And with that, I will turn to introducing our guest speaker, who's JD Stillwater. Well, let me say this first. We're trying out something new here at CIPL. We often cut straight to the policy angle, or how you can get that EV charger or that free tree. But today we're going to reflect on a little more philosophy and some theology. And I must say, what made me reach out to JD is that I come from this tradition, the religious naturalist tradition. So I bumped into the front of the line when it comes to webinars. No, but so I'm really excited about this one. But let me introduce JD. So JD is a graduate of Cornell University and a science author who writes and speaks about profound insights from natural reality, insights that drive paradigm shifts and cultural awakening. This work springs from JD's love of science and his gift for making difficult concepts graspable for non-scientists. And really, Google JD Stillwater or YouTube it. He's got tons of content online that you can watch that boils down complex ideas in a really cool way. JD is an officer of the Religious Naturalist Association, a global community that I'm a part of people who take nature to heart, serves on the governing council of the Institute on Religion in the Age of Science, and is also a fellow of Sinai and Synapses. JD is married and has been since 1987 and has two grown children. Take it away, JD.
Hi, I am glad to be here. Let me just make sure that I have screen sharing set up and we're all ready to go. I think we're good. I'm really thrilled and I feel privileged to be speaking with California Interfaith Power and Light because I think it's really important, this work of reaching across theological and scriptural divides in order to preserve a place for human beings on this planet. Wouldn't it be nice if there were no scriptural divides? Or in other words, what if there were a common scripture that was shared by all religions, all humanity? It sounds pretty far-fetched, doesn't it? First, I should probably tell you a little bit about my own religious perspective. I am a religious naturalist, and a religious naturalist is someone who experiences natural reality with a religious sensibility. So, for example, when I ponder the intricate complexity of the human body, I feel awe and wonder. When learning about the interconnectedness that makes a forest so much more than just trees, I practice reverence and devotion. Thinking about the history of life on Earth and the vastness of the universe, I feel humble and grateful to be alive. So these are religious sensibilities, a religious or spiritual attitude cultivated from what science reveals about natural reality without reference to anything otherworldly. So that's where I'm coming from. And what follows is a kind of a mashup of a talk I gave at the most recent Parliament of the World's Religions, along with some other thoughts specifically related to climate. Now, the dictionary definition of scripture is really short. Religious writings regarded as holy or sacred. What do we mean by sacred? Well, pagan priestess Starhawk once wrote that something is sacred when there's no end, no goal that would justify its destruction or its desecration. And if you like that definition, it suggests that sacred texts describe things or ideas that must be protected, revered, cherished. Well, a few summers ago, I learned about a podcast called Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. So this Harvard divinity student named Vanessa Zoltan began reading the classic fiction book Jane Eyre as though it were a sacred scripture, just to see what spiritual meaning she might be able to glean from it. And she and her professor were astounded at how beneficial that was. And so the effort grew into a study group. And at some point, somebody in the group suggested that maybe they should try this with books people actually like. so, so they started studying the Harry Potter books as though they were sacred texts. And it grew into a podcast. And here we are 9 or 10 years later, and 20 million people have benefited spiritually from studying the Harry Potter books as though they were scripture. And that's in spite of J.K. Rowling's dismaying transphobia. And their point is not that Harry Potter is a sacred text. It isn't. They chose it because it's well known and there's a lot going on in the story's plot. Now, I mention this because I think if it can work with Harry Potter, of all things, it could probably work with almost any text. And what these folks are doing is exegesis, which means interpretation of a text, especially usually sacred texts. And Vanessa and her team say in big bold type on their website, we believe that in treating texts as sacred, we can learn to treat one another as sacred. And they emphasize that this works with Harry Potter, remember, it works because of three things: trust, rigor, and community. Trust that the text can yield generous rewards. Rigor, well, here's how they put it. They say, the text in and of itself is not sacred, but is made so through our rigorous engagement with it. And then community, in that it takes a village to be uplifted together, to make holy meaningfulness from a text studied in community. So I think if millions of people can extract spiritual enrichment from studying the Harry Potter books, then if we had a global text that we all regarded as sacred, what miracles could arise from interfaith study of it, especially if we studied it with trust, rigor, and in community? The world might be pretty different, I think. If we had a common scripture, different people would probably make different meanings from it. And I think that's okay. As you know, the billions of people who study the Hebrew book of Genesis have all kinds of different takes on the role of women, for example. So having a common scripture doesn't necessarily prevent misuse of it or guarantee religious reconciliation, but I think it might help. At the very least, we could have some shared holidays, right? We would have a common language for addressing challenges, from personal challenges all the way up to global crises, like a climate that's fast approaching tipping points of no return. At heart, religious scriptures are about spiritual experience. And when I ask people to share about their spiritual experiences, almost always they describe something that happened in a natural setting or an experience that was deeply connective, or often both, connective experience in nature. Well, here's the big reveal. We do have a common global scripture, and your connection with IPL suggests that you might already know what I'm talking about here. And we might disagree about the divine provenance of one another's traditional scriptures, but this one we know to have been directly, personally written by the Creator, however we perceive and name that ultimate source. Our common scripture is nature, creation, natural physical reality. A vast cosmos we now know to be at least 47 billion light years across. A universe that includes all of us here on Earth, along with uncountable other Earths. Did you know that there are more solar systems in the visible universe than there are grains of sand on Earth? Let that sink in. There are more solar systems in the universe than there are grains of sand on this planet. Imagine if your own holy scripture contained a sentence like this one. The sun is a fire bigger than a million earths, and there are more worlds in the heavens than grains of sand on earth. What meaning would you make of that as you studied it in like a Bible study class or something? How does it feel to contemplate that? Does it expand your feelings about who or what could have created such a cosmos? Now imagine that that sentence isn't just a sentence in a book recorded by a revered prophet long ago, but a present day reality you can see with your own eyes. Imagine that anyone can see it and engage with you about what it means to them, how they feel knowing it. How do you feel knowing this? When I ask people that question, some people say it makes them feel really small, really insignificant. And, you know, it's true. Astronomer Neil deGrasse Tyson says we are a speck on a speck on a speck on a speck. Really, really small. Well, one of those pictures, this one, is a photograph of Earth taken by the Voyager 1 probe from beyond the orbit of Neptune. Your entire life, all of human history, all of evolution took place on that tiny speck. Carl Sagan described it as a pale blue dot suspended in a sunbeam. A speck. On the other hand, as far as we know, the only complex life in the entire universe is here on Earth. 2 trillion galaxies of stars, and this tiny dot of a planet may have the only eyes, the only hearts, the only love, the only minds to appreciate it all. So again, are we a speck or are we precious beyond measure? Well, science just describes, and in that regard, it's a text. It doesn't tell us what it means, doesn't tell us what to make of it. Science concerns itself with what is. So it's up to each of us to determine what it means. And human beings are hardwired for making meaning. We can't really avoid it. We think in metaphors and analogies. And when we're doing science, it's pretty essential that we stick as closely as possible to the raw facts. And it's really important not to confuse our models and metaphors with reality itself. But make no mistake, meaning will be made from new knowledge one way or another. So when scientists and science writers insist that the cosmos is devoid of meaning, well, they may be right, but at best they leave a void that will get filled with something. And at worst, I think they encourage people to reject science altogether because, you know, our guts tell us that nothing is completely meaningless. The universe we know today is 100 quadrillion times bigger than the one Galileo got in trouble for proposing. So if you want to celebrate the glory of God, science should be a close companion on your spiritual path. And if you want to save humanity from an impending train wreck, it just makes sense to focus on the world we can agree on based on evidence. So, am I a mere speck or precious beyond measure? I say both. For me, being both minuscule and precious instills a durable humility along with a sense of responsibility. It says, I'm not in control here, and what I do really matters. I'm a terribly small part of something incomprehensibly vast, and nevertheless, I'm an essential part of it. There are more solar systems than grains of sand on Earth, and there are more water molecules in 1 tablespoon of water than all the stars and sand grains combined. Air and water molecules are so small and so numerous, and they cycle around the Earth so constantly that every cup of beverage you swallow, this is about 3 cups, every cup of beverage you swallow contains over 150 million water molecules that actually passed through Jesus's body during his lifetime. And if your religious founder lived more than about 35 years old, then it's even more than 150 million in every cup of beverage you'll ever drink. That's the science. So what does it mean? Well, to me, it means that all water is holy water. When I consider that as I drink mindfully, it connects me with all the ancestors on this dynamic living planet and with the holiness that infuses every moment I'm alive. Here again, it orients me squarely within a stream of flowing matter and energy far greater than myself and my daily struggles. And when I meditate on science revelations like this and interpret them like the chapters of a religious text, some consistent patterns stand out for me, like golden threads in nature's tapestry. I see patterns that have meaning, not only for me personally, but that I think offer to help heal a wounded society on a critically ill planet. I call them the insights. And I want to skim through just one of them this evening. I have in-depth talks about all of them. First, let me say that what I'm about to share is partly science and partly exegesis. It's interpretive meaning making from the findings of science. Somebody else might look at the exact same science knowledge and interpret it differently, and that's okay. Unity. The kind of genetic testing being done routinely now makes it clear that every human being on this planet is a distant cousin. Everyone here this evening are all cousins of each other. How do we greet a cousin we've never met that turns up at a family reunion? Now, of course, I'm not just talking about people who are easy to know and get along with. I'm also talking about the panhandler I ignored yesterday, the guy who cut me off on the road, people with unfamiliar ways, and world leaders that I regard as evil. Those are my cousins too. And this doesn't thrill me. It's not all sweetness and light. I don't like that the water I drink has been part of people who do awful things. Revelations are not always comfortable. And that's true of most sacred scriptures, right? Discomfort is part of the spiritual journey. Our choice is to face the truth of it or to live in superficial denial of reality. All humans are cousins. Every conflict is a family conflict. Every war is a civil war. Recognizing this has been profoundly meaningful for me personally. And this deep kinship doesn't stop with human beings. Those same genetic tests and many other lines of evidence reveal that every living thing on this planet is blood related, even the ones that have nothing like blood, and really not all that distant from my human cousins. This is my 304,325,256th cousin, 110,385,693 times removed. So the tree of life is a family tree with branches for every living thing on this planet. And this is not just someone's conjecture. There's overwhelming evidence that this is a fact. And we can map out precise relationships based on the genetic code. We humans are neither the root nor the apex of the tree. We're just one leaflet on one small branch. That's the science. Now, what meaning are we going to make from that? How will we treat our kin? Here on Earth, all boundaries and distinctions are either arbitrary or temporary. Earth is one thing. not separate from us or even separable into distinct parts. One living Earth organism. Earth's matter flows through me minute by minute, coming from elsewhere on the planet and going on to other adventures after being me. Until recently, I used the word interdependence for this, but it never felt quite adequate to me because we're not separate objects that depend on trading materials and energy with other objects. We are integral elements of a larger whole. I am the water cycle and the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle, kind of like my blood and my bones are my body. They're not all of it, but they're not separable either. A few years ago, I learned the word interbeing as used by Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh. I think interbeing fits better. I'm not a distinct but interdependent object. I exist as an integral interbeing with a living planet. Just imagine if one of my bodily tissues was at war with the others. Could it possibly win that war? A few years ago, it occurred to me that we know our human systems are killing the earth, but we seem driven to keep doing it. It's almost like an addiction. I think I might need a 12-step recovery meeting. Hi, I'm JD and I'm addicted to fossil fuels. I've tried to quit. I really have, but I keep using. I've relapsed more times than I can count. I tried biking, line drying my laundry. I voted. I gave money to 350.org and IPL, Third Act, everything. But my cravings, my overwhelming drive to burn gasoline, to fly to Orlando and drive to Target overpowers me every time. Heck, I drove here in a plug-in hybrid this morning, so I have exactly 2.5 hours of sobriety. I'm desperate. I've hit bottom. I need help. And then this is where you all say, thanks for sharing. But seriously, there are strong similarities between substance use disorders and our dependence on fossil fuels, like denial that there's a problem at all. If you've thought that climate change deniers seem awfully angry, consider that in 12-step circles, it is often said that the addict's anger is the first stage of grief at losing their denial that they have a problem. Hopelessness. I've tried everything and I just can't seem to stop. It's hopeless. Withdrawal from using the substance hurts in some way. It costs something, or it requires substitutes just to get by, just to survive the withdrawal. An alcoholic knows that they're buying booze with the rent money that was due yesterday. The meth addict knows that she hasn't eaten for a week and that her kids are neglected and hungry too, and that her body is decaying before her eyes, but she uses anyway. I know that my fossil fuel use is increasing the destructiveness of hurricanes and wildfires and contributes to the number of refugees surging northward. And, sometimes I excuse myself by thinking, well, everyone is doing it. Sounds kind of like an alcoholic, doesn't it? Well, everyone is not doing it. A nonstop flight from New York to San Francisco produces more carbon dioxide per economy class passenger than an average person living in Cameroon emits in a whole year. If we want more than lip service regarding climate justice, I think we have to face that fact, face facts, without blinking or hand waving. It's us. Cars and airplanes are kind of like drug delivery systems. When I know that my behavior is causing harm to myself or others, but I keep doing it, I am in a spiritual crisis. When I know that my behavior is causing harm to myself or others, and I keep doing it, I am in a spiritual crisis. Same as an alcoholic or a heroin addict or a problem gambler. 12-step communities have all these slogans, these short, pithy sayings that help interpret and apply the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And one of them is progress, not perfection. Complex problems like healing from the disease of addiction, they're never all or nothing. There is a lot I can do to change my behavior in ways that will help. But if I try to do all of it tomorrow, it's not going to work. It's going to be overwhelming. 12-step programs are big on facing facts, accepting reality as it is, because the disease of addiction messes with that. And I know there's controversy out there among climate change activists about whether we should focus on our personal emissions or focus on changing the larger systems. Well, the fact is that my behavior drives those larger systems, and those systems make it really hard to change my behavior. So it's both. I can fly less, or I can push for carbon taxes that raise the price so that I fly less. But, reality is rarely either or. Both would probably be ideal. So I think we should do what we can. Which brings us back to science. Please don't confuse science and technology. Science is what we know. Technology is know-how. It's what we do with our knowledge. Knowledge is almost always good to have. We get to choose how we use it, how we apply it. When I was a young teenager, some friends took my whole family water skiing, the only time I've ever tried it. Well, of course, I went down within the first second, and I got dragged face first through the water at high speed for what felt like forever, while people in the boat were yelling, "Let go of the rope, let go of the rope." We'll talk about drinking from a fire hose. I don't even want to know how much lake water and seaweed and small invertebrates were forcibly shoved into my stomach and lungs before that boat finally stopped. Does anyone else feel like technology is dragging us face first through the murky waters of future shock? Now, even the captains of technological progress are warning us that AI is poised to potentially kill us all. It makes me want to think like this. Well, a few years back, I spoke at an academic conference whose theme was this: how new technologies are going to save us. And I chuckled when I saw it because I don't believe technologies can save us. I hope I'm wrong about that, but there's a long history of new technologies causing new, more intractable problems than the ones they were invented to solve. I think if we don't address the root problem, which is that our cultural systems, including our religions, are extractive, exploitive, and divisive at heart. In other words, if we use technology as the heavy rug we hide our moral failings under, we're only going to accelerate our own demise and condemn more of our critter cousins to go down with us. I guess that makes me a pessimist, but optimism and pessimism, they're not a binary. There's diversity and nuance there. There's also a lot of talk about hope now and not losing it, as though you're hopeful or you're hopeless, with no nuance or in between allowed. Well, my favorite take on hope comes from Rebecca Solnit. You may have heard this before. She writes, quote, "Hope is not a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch, feeling lucky. Hope is an axe that you break down doors with in an emergency. Hope should shove you out the door because it will take everything you have to steer the future away from endless war, from the annihilation of the earth's treasures and the grinding down of the poor and marginal. To hope is to give yourself to the future. And that commitment to the future is what makes the present inhabitable." End quote. Wow. Why do we continue to insist that we can solve problems with the same mentality that caused them? A faster motorboat will not help the fallen water skier. The cause of our many environmental crises isn't a lack of technology or too much technology or even the unintended consequences of fossil fuels. I think the underlying problem is a worldview that is misaligned with reality. I heard an interview with Bayo Akomolafe in which he said, nature is a deeply colonial term. Nature is a colonizer's term. What? I was shocked and confused. And then I tried thinking about it from an indigenous perspective. A worldview that makes no distinction between human beings and the rest of reality doesn't need a term for that distinction. There is no other out there to refer to as nature. From an indigenous perspective, which is the only example we have for long-term sustainable cultures, it doesn't make any sense to go, quote, spend some time in nature. Wherever you go, you're already there. Try this for a few days. Every time you might have said nature or natural, instead say reality or real or the world. It's a totally different perspective. And that colonialist culture, that physical reality is mundane, debased, different from us, and ours to subdue and exploit, that is the crisis. Climate change, extinctions, collapsing ecosystems, these are all symptoms that follow organically from a worldview of separation and domination. If we want to heal from that, I think we need a worldview that's integrated, one that connects us with our literal relatives in the tree of life and with all existence. I think we have to understand at a gut level that we are interbeing with Earth. You've probably never heard anyone say this before, but science is an inherently interfaith endeavor. The work of science is done by representatives from every major faith tradition on this planet, and they share their process and their findings globally for all humanity to take inspiration from. More than nations or religious organizations or NGOs, really more than any other human endeavor, science is people from every culture and nation and faith working together to reveal the secrets of creation. The fact that they rarely discuss religion doesn't mean science isn't interfaith. Whether you call it creation or nature or physical reality, as I do, we meet and engage one another in this world. However, we might disagree about the nature and naming of transcendent realities, we generally agree that Earth is round, right? Or that DNA sequences guide the development of our bodies. We agree that microscopic pathogens cause infectious diseases, and that devices based on quantum effects in tiny transistors work, right? The culture wars urge us to think of science as some kind of enemy of religion and spirituality, claiming that science reduces all magic and mystery to the mundane mud of materialism. Well, I got to tell you, the last 150 years in science have done just the opposite. Every discovery, every dark frontier illuminated reveals even greater mysteries beyond the shores of our knowledge. And with each new revelation, nature's glory and intricacy grow, often by leaps and bounds. And in me, they inspire an ever-expanding awe of the creative forces that birthed all this. So, for me, it's tempting to say, science is awesome, but it's reality that's awesome. Science just reveals it to us. Science offers revelations that could serve as a global interfaith scripture on the handiwork of ultimate source. When something is sacred, nothing can justify its destruction or desecration. The text, in and of itself, is not sacred, but is made so through our rigorous engagement with it. We believe that in treating texts as sacred, we can learn to treat one another as sacred. Physical reality is a sacred text. And sacred texts describe things that must be protected, revered, cherished. Approached with trust that studying it can yield spiritual rewards, rigorous, earnest engagement to make it sacred, and to do so in community, local and global interfaith communities. Natural reality, as science reveals it to us, could be the biggest, widest, most inviting bridge between faiths ever proposed. When we treat this world as sacred, knowing that our bodies are one with the whole of creation, we might just come to treat one another as sacred too. Sacred elements of a sacred planet, minuscule and precious in a vast and glorious cosmos. Thanks for being here this evening and for all that you do to work for a sustainable human presence on this planet. I look forward to your questions and comments, and I think we have some time for some good discussion. Thanks again, and I will stop screen sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was wonderful. The comparison, I think, to recovery was really fascinating. How we will participate in things or do things, and we even know that we should not be doing them. But that is a vicious cycle. Please, folks, if you'd like to ask a question, I know that the regular chat has been disabled, but the Q&A is open and you can throw some questions in there. I will read one of the comments. You can also send comments because the chat's disabled, so you can send comments that way as well. But someone writes, Mina writes, the great Sufi Hazrat Ali said 1400 years ago, do you suppose that you are only a speck while the greater world is contained within you? I think that's beautiful. And then I actually wrote a question down let me pull up my notes here. I've done that thing where I have too many browsers. Um, how,
Can I offer,
how,
before you do that, can I
yeah,
offer a follow-up?
yeah,
Uh, Rumi, the Islamic poet Rumi said, and this is hundreds of years ago, he said, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop."
I'm gonna drop
And
one.
that's sort of the flip side of.
Right. That's beautiful. Okay, cool. Here's some questions and one of them kind of connects with what I was going to say. But so there's two directions. The question comes from Jim, and it's what can we do specifically in relation to this? And so take it two directions. How does religious naturalism or this concept of science and spirituality impact, change, affect our activism when it comes to the policy we might think about, or um, the more legislative work, whether it's working with indigenous people or, thinking not that we control nature, but that we're a part of this natural world. Use the word nature, which I would love for you to trouble that some more. And then how can we change, how can we flip what can we do in our congregations? How does religious naturally, so maybe there's a spiritual practice, maybe there's a scientific study that we could do together. Maybe it's solar panels or something like that. But maybe those are the two ways you could take that. What do we do with this grounding and this kind of change of understanding that we are a part of the natural world and not something that we dominate, control, and that kind of thing?
Well, I think the main thing that this approach offers is a change in attitude. Just for me, what seems to have the most internal impact is that analogy with different organs in my body. If I think of myself as one cell in the body of humanity, which is one organ in the body of the whole planet, it just doesn't make sense to be at war with other parts of that body. And so sharing in our congregations and among our friend groups and over the dinner table, that sensibility, whether you use my analogy or a different one, first of all, that this natural reality is our common ground. This is what we really do have in common amongst all of our other diversity of thought. And then layered on top of that, that we can't, that everything, as Jane Goodall says, you can't not matter. You can't not have an impact on the world around you. So you have to decide what kind of impact you want to have. And the huge promise that I see in that religious naturalism offers to the rest of the faith community is that bridge between faiths. That we don't have to agree on what's happening in transcendent realms, but we can agree, and we have historically agreed. You know, I don't, well, with the exception of the small number of flat earthers, I don't think there's any major religious tradition that doesn't accept astronomy as it currently exists. And science and religion have evolved together over the last 500 or so years, and they're continuing to evolve. So,
So we've got two comments, both of them saying wonderful. Thank you for a great positive presentation. It gives us really good motivation. And then someone mentions that they're a part of an Islamic Sufi community and the sustainability department, and how this really connects with that. And then someone asks that, so from their tradition, is nature and its complexity reveal a creator God in his majesty. So, but within the religious naturalist view, how does this vision ground itself ethically? How do we, because if we were to just look at the natural world, we might look at the predators and go, I'm like that.
right,
But we might look at the ants and say, well, we're collectivized, you know?
right.
So how do we look at the world and make some ethics out of it?
Well, people from every faith tradition have a long tendency to cherry pick from their own scriptures. And what you're pointing to is the obvious ability to cherry pick from reality, physical realities, scriptures as well. And the antidote to that in any religious tradition is to come back to those universal human values that come out of, actually, I would say they are evolved. And they evolved from some very intelligent primates having to live in groups together because that's just what we do. We're a social species of mammals. And there are universal values that ethicists and psychologists do these, they're called trolley problems. And things like, if you are in charge of a switch and the trolley, you can either run over a group of children or you can, they have all these different scenarios. Pretty universally, human beings from all different cultures and faith traditions answer those hypothetical ethical problems in similar ways. So there is a system of ethics that is built into human nature. And I think, again, whatever your scriptural background is, and whatever your faith tradition, you can resist that cherry picking for harmful ideologies by constantly defaulting to those universal sort of innate ethics. But you're right, it's a real danger. You can't really look to nature. You can look for patterns, but you can't, I don't think, and the Religious Naturalist Association has had many long controversies and debates, long discussions about, can you? And so far the answer is no, you can't really create a system of ethics based on looking at physical reality.
Hmm. Do you have any tips or ideas? This comes from Gerald, on how we can get out of our own silos and talk to people that are different than us with these ideas. Um, I like the idea of that you mentioned of just talking to your friends, your neighbors, bringing this up around the dinner table, casual, but bringing it up. I mean, it sounds simple, but in reality, those are the conversations that make change. But do you have any ideas of how we might reach out to the difference that, or to people that don't immediately agree with us?
Yeah, there's science on this. It turns out in study after study that the best way to persuade people is not with evidence. People are not persuaded by evidence. They're persuaded by narratives, maybe, but the most persuasive thing you can do in a conversation is be curious. Sincerely, authentically curious. Why do you think that? Where did that come from? Can you tell me about the source of the information that you just shared with me? And when you continue to come from a place of sincere curiosity, it allows them the freedom to re-examine their own perspective in a way that opens them up to other perspectives, including yours. What doesn't work is to tell them they're wrong, to tell them that they've been listening to fake news, I mean, all the stuff that you see on social media when people are going back and forth. Rarely, very rarely does that make any difference at all. It pushes people into a defensive posture where they look up more support for their earlier perspective. And that's another thing that's built into our evolved operating system: confirmation bias. And there's a whole chart of um, things, fallacies that are built into the way human brains work. And we don't want to push people into using those fallacies. We want them to think critically about their own stuff, and curiosity is the main thing.
Wonderful. The last question I see here is one that I'm really interested in too. And we talked a lot about this when I was in grad school, actually. So I really appreciate you bringing this up. But can you talk more about the term? This comes from Colleen. Talk more about the term creation as compared to nature and physical reality. And then just go deep dive into that concept of nature and how it creates separation, and that's false.
Well, I think if we're going to create a sustainable culture, sustainable global civilization for sure, we're going to have to surrender this idea that we are separate from nature and that it is ours to rule and dominate. The language we use is going to be different in different, like, actual languages, but also even in English. I don't know what term we're going to end up with. Because I'm a religious naturalist and because I come out of the Western civilization, you know, thousands of years of philosophical thought, the word nature has so many different ways of understanding it. Most of the time, when I say nature, I mean physical reality. When I'm talking to atheists, I use the term nature to mean physical reality, all of it, including everything that humans do. When I'm talking with deeply religious people, who are theistic in their mindset, I use the word creation. To me, those are synonyms. We're talking about this amazingly vast physical reality of ours that got started somehow. We don't know. There's, or at least I should say, science does not know. Science cannot go before the beginning of time because science requires cause and effect. And if there's no time, what does it mean for something to happen before the beginning of time? There's no happening before the beginning of time. So the source of everything will always be a mystery. That is something, that is a question whose answer we can never all agree on based on evidence. So it's a fact that the universe had a beginning. It's a fact that time had a beginning. I think we can probably agree on that. But then the language we use to describe the ultimate source of it all is going to vary a lot. And so in the role that I play in this science and religion dialogue, I use reality and nature and creation as though they were synonyms, recognizing that with different audiences, I have to code switch a little bit. But it's the same thing. I'm still talking about this wondrousness, this existence, whose source is ultimately a mystery.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here, everyone. JD, can you tell us maybe how folks can plug into the Religious Naturalist Association or other projects that you might have?
Sure. The Religious Naturalist Association is, it's a lot of characters to type, but they'll take you to the same place. Religiousnaturalism.org, like it's one word.org, will get you there, but also religious-naturalist-association.org will take you to the same place. Or you could just Google Religious Naturalist Association, and it'll come up. My own work, if you want to learn more or watch some of my other talks, I've been doing this for quite a while. So there's lots of multimedia talks to enjoy on many different subjects. And easiest way to get to all that is in through my website, which is jdstillwater.earth, not .com or .net, .earth, jdstillwater.earth. And then from there are links to my YouTube channel, but you could also go straight to YouTube and type in JD Stillwater and I'll come up. Um, did I answer all of your questions?
Yes, that's perfect. And everyone who's on here, I put it all those links in the chat. So you should see some things in the chat. And people are responding right now because they can't type in the chat, but they're saying thank you and beautiful lecture. So thank you very much. Thank you, JD, for this presentation. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful job. Thank you all for being here. This has been recorded and we will post and share this. So please get the word out and share it once you see it on YouTube.
Can I
And
add one?
everybody, yeah, yeah, yeah.
When you get to my website, there's a tab in the menus for newsletter. If you want to get my monthly science news newsletter that includes updates on what I'm up to and all that, you can sign up there. It's fun.
Awesome. Sweet. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.